All right. Today we have Barmmer, the founder and CEO of FullWell, the only nutritionist founded and formulated reproductive health supplement brand delivering comprehensive nutrition designed to safely and effectively protect your fertility, nourish your body, and support your needs before, during, and after pregnancy. With over 20 years of experience in fertility nutrition, Ayla has been enhancing the health and empowerment of thousands of clients, patients, peers, and mentees at the intersection of nutrition science, functional medicine, and evidence based holistic solutions. While currently on a sabbatical from private practice work, Ayla owns and operates Boston Functional Nutrition, an integrative and functional nutrition multi clinic practice that specializes in women's health and infertility. Ayla has co founded Women's Health Nutrition Academy in 2018, a leader in its field. So, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to get to talk to you about all things fertility and preconception nutrition care. And yeah, we've been a fan of your product for a while and recommending it to many of our patients that are interested in starting that journey. And I also just really admire you with all the work that you've done to help other dietitians in the space really learn more about a topic that's not talked about enough, especially in our own undergraduate education.
Mm-hmm.
But two, just how you really stand by your values and what you want to change in this industry. And I just think that's really admirable. And so just really glad to have you on here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate those kind words.
Yeah. So I think we'd love to know just how did you get interested in becoming a dietitian specializing in fertility?
Yes. So, as you both know, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go as a dietitian. And I know when I was in school in undergrad at UConn, I absolutely loved, my nutrition for the life cycle classes. I was like hooked right at 18 as a freshman when I took that sort of intro course. Just the applicability of it in everyday life and how much nutrition really affects all humans throughout the lifespan. It really just always felt super empowering and really interesting to me. And I've always loved science too. So that's where it really started. But, when I graduated, it was definitely at a time where there was a really, really strong push. I think there still is, but a little less so to go right into like hospital setting and be a clinical dietitian, which is absolutely fine. I just kind of knew that wasn't for me and the direction I wanted to take. So I spent some time really bouncing around between a lot of different areas of nutrition, from teaching nutrition in a K-8 setting in a USDA grant funded program in Philadelphia, where I got to really see a more public health side of dietetics, which is really a great foundation. Actually, I would recommend for aspiring RDs to start with something in public health, because it gives you perspective beyond your own wherever spot in life is, and just sort of really making sure that you understand who you're serving and how. So I really loved that. Did corporate wellness, sports nutrition. I just bounced all over, and then I found myself doing a lot of consulting and sort of starting my private practice and starting to get referrals from a local fertility clinic. And at the time, I knew no other dietitians that were doing work in the fertility space. It really wasn't even considered an actual niche, I wouldn't say. And this was like 15, 20 years ago, right? And I hadn't learned, there was no continuing education on the topic, right? But when I was referred these women, and it was always only women, they were being told, okay, you need to go see a dietitian to lose as much weight as you can, as fast as possible, or we're going to cancel your cycle. Because the real one connection, or in the research that was being highlighted or even looked at in terms of how nutrition and lifestyle plays a role in fertility, was how weight affects fertility. And I was thinking intuitively at the time, I'm like, this can't be supportive for fertility. This can't be the way you want to go into pregnancy. by having this period of extreme restriction and when it's really a time of adding resources and making sure that we're replete in nutrients and we have what we need, and our body is getting the signal that this is a good time to conceive and we can have a healthy pregnancy. So intuitively it just didn't add up to me. And I also saw just the absolute stress and distress, that these women were in. And I was like, I think I can help more. And that's what really started my interest in it, was just wanting to find better solutions for these women that were being referred to me. And so I started just putting the pieces together by doing my own research, pulling together what I was finding, what made sense, and applying really a functional medicine approach to it. So the idea there being, how do we get to the root cause of what's going on, and so that's what really started my specializing in fertility and shifting my entire practice to being focused just on fertility and trying to share what I had learned through case studies and research and everything with colleagues.
Yeah, that's such a journey. You really got to jump around to all parts of nutrition, and it's been a long time coming to get to this point. 20 years. It's a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a long time. And I'm not tired of working in this niche yet at all. I think there's always so much more to learn, and there's more studies and research coming out. And also within fertility, there's so many, it's such a huge umbrella. And I think in that way, it can be very overwhelming for practitioners and also for individuals going through it, right? Because it's like, where do you start? Everybody's so unique. And there could be so many different root causes to what is going on with your fertility, that one of the things I love most is sorting through that puzzle and trying to bring it back to the things that we really know and will have the biggest bang for our buck, because it is such an overwhelming time and thing to have to deal with. Because a lot of times by the time you figure out you have fertility issues, you've been trying to conceive for a while, you're like, gosh, I wanted a baby 6 months, a year ago, and I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. I really describe it as a lot of emotional, financial, physical stress, on the body when it comes to fertility. So it's rewarding. It feels impactful to do this work, and I've always loved it.
I think it's really amazing how you saw that missing gap and you worked to fill it and continue to learn more about it to help people on their journey. So I guess on that topic too, Ayla, where would you say FullWell came into play?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you asked me even 5 years ago if I would be pretty much exclusively full-time, with FullWell, I would have been like, absolutely not. That's crazy. What I have really built and what the goal was to have this private practice that really served many different people. And where FullWell came into be was just to kind of set the stage. I mean, I never thought I was going to be launching a brand. I never came at it with even any experience whatsoever in, launching a product. But what I knew was, looking out there, and maybe you guys have had the same experience, when I was trying to put together protocols for my practice clients, when I was looking at integrating supplements, prenatal multivitamins were a huge feature in most people's protocols. So I really started there. And my a couple of things. So one, the formulas on the market, you could just see by looking at them, there was a marketer stamp, on that formula creation, and now that I've come to really understand the industry and kind of get behind the curtains, I know this is true across the board in most cases, that most formulas are fueled on the market, are fueled by marketing, market research data, business decisions, and not formulated by a health practitioner. And you can see that when you look at some of the choices, right? And so that was a problem. So anything from the form of the nutrient and whether or not we would tolerate and be able to utilize that form of that nutrient, to the doses, does that really match the evidence? And I think, particularly in the prenatal nutrition world, we have been operating with really outdated nutrition guidelines for a long time. And there hasn't been a really good look at where those came from, what the limitations are, and where they really should be by any of the conventional organizations. So, anyway, my goal was to really address the formula problems that I saw on the market. But then the other piece to it was the lack of transparency around what was being done to ensure that that product, what was in each serving, matched what was on the label, because you can't count on that. I think we look at labels, and I see a lot of practitioners do it too, and we're just judging based on that. But there's a lot of testing that needs to be done to ensure that the product actually does meet those label claims. And also making sure there isn't anything in there that we'd be concerned about, especially during this stage of life, but any stage of life, right? Which are contaminants like excessive heavy metals, or I get concerned about endocrine disruptors like BPA and glyphosate and phthalates and things like that. So I set out really wanting to go above and beyond on the testing side, have control of the formula, have control of the testing, and do everything that I would want for my patients, like in my practice, myself, my friends, my family, and then share those results so that no one had to just take my word for it. Because that was the other thing. There's a lot of companies that were kind of saying, well, we're doing third-party testing, but then it's like, how do you prove that? Like, what are you testing for? What do the results look like? I don't want to just kind of take your word for it. So a lot of this is me being a control freak. That's how FullWell came to be. It was that. And so it started out as me being like, all right, I want the perfect prenatal multivitamin for my practice clients and myself, my friends, my family, and we're just going to create that. And then when I launched it, it was sort of a last minute decision. I was 38 weeks pregnant by the time. That was not the plan. By the time that I had the actual product in hand and was like, I can put this out to the world. And I'm like, I am not waiting any longer, even though definitely don't do that for the sake of your own postpartum recovery. Like, do not launch something 38 weeks pregnant. But I did. And again, really last minute decided to put it up on a site where others could purchase it. And I had a lot of colleagues that were really appreciative of the formula. We're also looking for the same thing. And so that's how it started and has grown from there. Yeah.
Yeah. What a journey. What inspired you to start it? Like, what was like the biggest, because there's a lot that goes into everything that you described, like more than I think people know, but like what inspired you? What pushed you through all the stuff that had to happen to create that product?
Oh gosh, it really was so hard. I'm not gonna lie. It's been the hardest thing that I've ever done. I mean, most of my career was spent in the science, in the clinical world. I love it there. I was comfortable there. And then I found myself exactly where I wanted to be, though, behind the curtain of the supplement industry, trying to navigate it. And it is so much more than just, jotting down what you want a formula to look like. It is finding the right manufacturing partners. It's navigating all the complexity there to make sure the product is made correctly. It's trying to find labs that are qualified to test what you want, and then making sure they actually do test what you want. It's navigating the very real regulation in the industry, which there's sort of a misconception that the supplement industry isn't regulated at all. The reality is it is highly regulated. It's just there's a lot of self-policing needed because there isn't enough resources, from some of the FDA, the FTC to get to all the things. So while there's a lot of regulation and there are actual repercussions to not following them, there's just so many dietary supplements out there and companies and frankly some really bad players, right? Too, that it does require some self-policing. And I take it really seriously, the quality, the integrity of like our values and how we started, and have kept those no matter what, even when it's been really hard, like really, really hard, like having to throw out an entire run of product kind of a thing. I mean, there's been a lot to navigate, but I like, in the end, I think I've got full insight into, okay, where do things go wrong with the dietary supplement line? What is just smoke and mirrors and what I call pixie dusting, and what is really needed to create quality supplements. And I would love to see more dietitians, more trained nutrition experts, health practitioners, people who actually have seen and worked with real humans in real life, and we know what is needed, behind these formulas, and not just kind of figureheads, as part of a board or that kind of thing. So I could go off on that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I've talked about this a lot on Instagram, how I think I saw on Shark Tank, there was some guy that had a product that he was claiming all kinds of things for, and of course it didn't go well, but he was saying that it would replace eating or something like that, which is just so absurd.
Oh, Soylent? Was it soy?
I think so, yeah. And
What?
it was just really highlighted that internal belief that I share like you, that there really should be some criteria for who can formulate
Mm-hmm.
something. It really shouldn't be anybody and everybody. It would, and I've heard dietitians even say, oh, it's not regulated. All supplements aren't regulated, and it's a misconception, but there's a lot that needs to change, I think, in
Mm-hmm.
who can make a product, and the precautions that everyone's taking as like the standard for making a good product.
Yeah, and what's challenging too, and I know it from living it myself, is when you're a practitioner with a private practice and you're trying to serve your clients and you're busy and you're doing a lot and you're spending most of your day in those sessions, it's hard to dig in enough in the research, like to really dig into a company's how they're doing it right or wrong and all the nuance around it. And so I think a lot of health practitioners get stuck in the trap of just evaluating the labels and what the company says and taking that at face value. And I think what I'm encouraging is to, one, I mean, companies shouldn't make it so hard. Just be transparent at the get-go. Like, and those are the ones that I think you'd want to work with, because it's like they understand that you don't have time to become a complete expert in the business and intricacies of a supplement business, but you need to know enough to ensure that what you're recommending is safe, effective, is being tested properly, right? And not take my word for it sort of situation.
Yeah. And that's really neat that you you actually you don't just say we're third party tested, but you show that you're third party tested. And I can't think of any other company that does that actually shows that.
Yeah, third party tested, but then also like it's got to be an ISO certified lab. Like there's just so much. It's just like it is with anything, right? There's a lot of nuance. Like, is it third party tested for all the things or just like one thing, right? And is it being third party tested through a reputable qualified lab? Because there's a lot of labs out there that could be qualified as a third party and independent lab, right? That aren't ISO certified or aren't doing things properly either. So, yep.
What does ISO certified mean for people who want to
So
know?
now I need to look at exactly that, but it's a set of, just like most industries, I mean, it's a set of standards and also independent auditing that ensures that the lab is testing in a validated way, that they're following processes and procedures to ensure that their testing methodology, their results are accurate, right? Because there actually are quite a few different ways to test things, and to some extent you have a choice, but you want to use the best possible way to test things. And you want to ensure that the results are reliable and replicable, right? And so that an ISO certified lab really, that's the highest degree of qualification of a lab that they can get to ensure that they are following those processes and procedures. Yep.
So Ayla, I do have a question about something you touched on in our discussion so far. You mentioned like you would love to see more healthcare practitioners involved in supplement companies. Do you feel right now, as how things stand, do you feel like there's being some advancements there?
So my concern with what I'm seeing is that businesses really value the dietitian and comparable credentials. They value them. They see the value because their consumers see the value, right?
Mm.
But what I think that they're doing is they're offering like positions on boards or maybe like ambassador. And we do have an ambassador program that's a little different, or like affiliate type of programs, or saying we'll pay you for an endorsement or will you endorse the brand. But that's not the same as having someone truly directing a formula, truly involved in every quality control aspect of it in the operations of a company. And that's where I don't know of, I'm trying to think, I mean, of another brand where that's really happening to the extent that it should be. Like, I think that there are dietitians involved, but I also think a lot are being taken advantage of, and their credentials are being used. So my piece of advice, if there are any dietitians listening, is just to really know your worth with that, right? And you should be really making sure that a name and likeness fee is being used, because your credential matters. They're capitalizing on that, right? But really also know that you're the expert in terms of what that formula should look like. And ultimately, I think, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place, but what I do see with brands is they might say that it's like OBGYN or, formulated or founded. And in reality, if you dig in, it's like Unilever is the owner of the company. It's founded by two marketing or Silicon Valley kind of professionals, right? And they might have some consulting or at least have paid or given shares of the company to a health practitioner. So the whole business of it all is it kind of it's frustrating, it can be really frustrating because a lot of those brands are really loud and have a lot of investors, and you hear a lot about them and they feel really compelling, right? But I think it's just digging down. What's important to you? To me, it's definitely quality. And I think, trying to get that information from any company you're considering working with is important. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, in that, like, even if it is OB-GYN formulated, like, do they have any nutrition background to be formulating? And that's the other question. But I guess, is there a mission behind FullWell, or what's like the overall aim? You've touched on different parts of it, but I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I'm excited for where we're going in 2025. And so there's some things that like we're gonna really unveil like in the first part of the year that I'm excited about. But I can say, just largely speaking, where I am most passionate and where I think we can make the most impact on not only our health now, conception and pregnancy health, but the health of really future generations is through preconception nutrition. What we do preconception in those 3-6 months, little give or take, right, for both women and men, make a profound impact on the health of a pregnancy, the health of baby, long term, the health of families, ultimately communities, right? So I get really excited about that because I really think that we, generally speaking, the conversation is around prenatal nutrition when we think about that. But it's really those period of time preconception that has that biggest impact through epigenetics, which you guys may or may not have talked about before on the podcast. Maybe that's come up, but this idea that our body, just as humans, through time and evolution, right? The principles of evolution, right? Like we're always taking signals from our environment, what's going on, to pass on to offspring, right? So like what you're doing and how you're nourishing your body and the types of things that you're exposed to, and not everything we can control, but these are the things that are getting essentially tagged, right, on egg and sperm. And then when conception occurs and the embryo starts to develop, that's the information that it's using to really determine health and long-term, for anything from metabolic health to, gut health. There's so many different things that you can trace, that preconception period to later on. So I just think I get excited about preventative health, getting us out of the allopathic medical model, which is very much like wait until something is a diagnosis so we can treat it. Getting away from that and just thinking, okay, how this is like almost like a functional medicine approach to just wellness in life, right? Is like, where's the ultimate place that we can have the biggest impact? And to me, one of those times in our life is really preconception.
It's a good way to like just encompass everything. Is there something that you would say would be most important to consider with preconception care?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, my big focus is on nutrition. And I think it's flooding the body with the right stuff. It's making sure key nutrients are replete and in good, like robust amounts. I think of things like folate, choline, vitamin B12, even magnesium to some extent, like making sure that we have enough of. And part of that is taking them in through diet and supplements. And then part of that also is making sure that like, your digestive system has the capacity to really absorb it and that your body can utilize it in the form that it's in. So we've got a couple considerations, but making sure that you've really got enough nutrients to help your body efficiently process the things that we have in our environment, from environmental contaminants like pollution, endocrine disruptors, to making sure that your body has enough resources to protect the egg and the sperm. That's an incredibly nutrient intensive process. egg development, sperm development, and then embryo development and those early stages of pregnancy. It's like we don't think that there's a lot that comes into play. A lot of people don't even start taking a prenatal multivitamin until maybe they've got their first visit, like somewhere towards the end of the first trimester, or like sometime after pregnancy is confirmed, right? They're starting to consider that. But really, I would argue that the most important time to take one is 3-6+ months prior to conceiving. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, of course, this is an IBD podcast and we bring on lots of different people. But with IBD, of course, inflammatory bowel disease, Ayla, do you know what role inflammation would play in preconception or even when the fetus is developing?
Yep. Yep. Well, I will say, I mean, I think the good news is for listeners, that have IBD, you can go on to have a healthy pregnancy. You could go on to have healthy children. Absolutely. Right. What I found in practice was that my patients with IBD had to have a higher emphasis on antioxidants and higher levels of nutrient intake to account for malabsorption, to account for the stress, right? The oxidative stress that your body can be under when inflammation is higher. Because the way that I think about fertility, right, is like your body is going to prioritize just about everything else over reproduction, right? That's just how we're designed, and so we want to try to get things as imbalanced and inflammation as calmed down as possible, so that the body can say, okay, we have enough resources available for conception and a healthy pregnancy. So what I have found is it can require more supplementation, more strategic nutrition in general, and more antioxidants, for those with IBD to be successful. Yeah.
That makes sense, because a lot of nutrients are inflammation sensitive, so you're utilizing a lot more, and that's just within a flare. Like 30 to 40% of people with IBD are going to be low in like vitamin D, for example, and you add on top of that developing a child or that fertility journey. There's just so much demand there to be able to ask your body to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think getting things like iron, vitamin D really looked at and assessed as far in advance of conception as possible is wise. Those will have a really profound influence on the health of a pregnancy. And sometimes, I know, in practice, like, I've definitely had IBD clients who needed to get iron infusions for a period. Like it was just a part of the deal to get themselves up to a place where we could work on maintaining, those iron levels going into pregnancy, because you don't want that to get too low. And same with vitamin D, it has such a profound action, and it's almost hormone-like when it comes to fertility and reproductive health.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple things that I think people listening are going to find interesting, or not what they thought, like, preconception, the idea of like going beyond just a couple weeks, but 3 to 6 months out, but also the male fertility part of the equation, which we only talk about prenatal care for person conceiving. We don't ever talk about the other side of the equation, which is also a variable. But I guess maybe talk a little about like what's really missing from the conversation when it comes to fertility, when people start going to their doctor and talking about it.
Oh, I'm so passionate about this. I'm really glad you asked. So yes. We really squarely put the burden of fertility, pregnancy, all of that on women's shoulders. And you see that really highlighted when there's anything like a pregnancy loss, like miscarriage, and just the weight of that on women. And even in my practice, it would be like 99% of the outreach would only be from women, with the expectation that just her would be working with me. And this is just part culturally how we've treated, I think, fertility and pregnancy. We've treated it forever as a women's health issue. And even though it disproportionately affects women's health, men have a huge role in the health of the pregnancy that goes so far beyond just fertilization, right? And that's what I think we've limited it to. It's like sperm are needed for fertilization and then the job is done. But that's not the reality. I talked about it just a little bit earlier about this concept of epigenetics and how both egg and sperm are taking cues from our environment, both from nutrition inputs and like pollution and, all these different things we're tagging, so that will affect how much of the pregnancy goes. And so what we know now in some of the research, that I can't believe this isn't like just headlines everywhere, but maybe this is just me, but that men preconception, what they do, both nutrition and lifestyle wise, affects the development of the placenta, even more so than women's health. So that's kind of wild to me. So so there was a really interesting study that was really looking at how the health of the sperm and some of the signals that it really sends, or what contribute most to how healthy and overall the development of the placenta. And the placenta, of course, is an organ that women grow in pregnancy from scratch, which is also a nod to that, right? But it's what nourishes baby. It's like, the conduit of all types of hormones. It's hugely important to the health of a pregnancy. And a lot of complications can be traced back to the health of the placenta, like preeclampsia, to some extent, maybe gestational diabetes, preterm birth. So you see in the research that partially by that mechanism and also others, men's preconception health will affect the risk of really serious pregnancy complications that affect both women's health and baby. And then beyond pregnancy, men's preconception health is setting the stage for metabolic health of baby and any other number of health outcomes. So we've got to pay more attention to what men are also doing preconception, because we may be able to avoid, some of these really risky aspects of pregnancy, or at least reduce the risk and protect, both mom and baby. But it's just not being talked about. And I think I'd like to think that men would absolutely step up and do what's needed if they knew,
Yeah, it really isn't. I don't ever hear anyone talking about fertility in terms of men's health. Is there anything in particular where it stands out that you've kind of seen in your clinical practice of things that you've seen pop up that on the male side that needed to change?
I would say, when I've worked with men, there's a lot of really somewhat similar deficiencies that you'll see, like a lot of overlap in the nutrients that are really important. So like vitamin D, folate, the B12, B vitamins, like these are all really important. Antioxidants are even more important in antioxidant status for men, because more so than the egg, sperm are exceptionally at risk for oxidative damage. They don't have the ability to repair their own membranes like eggs do to some extent. They, once they're damaged, they're damaged. And that can be the root of a lot of issues, right? And you might see that show up on a semen analysis where there's morphology, like shape issues with the sperm, or motility issues, like the tail's been damaged. Overall count can go down. And usually what I see is that across the board, a lot of antioxidants are depleted. And so that leads me to think, okay, like what is all this oxidative stress? Like, I've had, clients where their job was full-time painting or carpentry work or something like that. And there was very clear like sources of exposures of things. I'm not saying that the solutions to this are not complex. They are, right? Like we can't just quit our jobs, but it does kind of point us in the right direction. So I would say for men, I end up focusing a lot on B vitamins, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, so important for the integrity of the membrane of sperm. So fish oil and antioxidants as being really effective. Yeah.
That's just so interesting, because as a dietitian, we know a lot of things about nutrition, but I've never heard anyone talk so much about the antioxidant aspect of things before when it came to fertility.
Yeah, hugely important for reproductive health for both women and men. And I think probably one of the things that I think we can really point to as being a reason for why fertility is so much more challenging and we are seeing so much more infertility is the amount of oxidative stress that we're generally all under. We've just got environments where we can't control the amount of plastics and various contaminants. And so we need more antioxidants to combat it. I think we need more than we ever did before. I mean, they're finding in studies that plastics, microplastics are found in the majority of men's testicles now, right? So it's really profound, how pervasive some of these harmful contaminants are to our reproductive health are in our environment. So, but it's not all doom and gloom. It really isn't. Like, I think we can combat this, but it's one of the reasons why I think supplementation is so helpful now, because it's harder now to get what we need from diet for a whole bunch of reasons we could talk about, right? To get all that we need from diet without doing some of this supplementation, at least at certain points in life.
Yeah. What do you feel like are the most important nutrients when it comes to, you talked a little bit about a few, but what are your top nutrients that you feel like are not being talked about enough? Because really all we hear about is folic acid. That's all anyone ever talks about. But yeah, what are your most important nutrients in your mind?
Gosh, and I could really go off on folate versus folic acid, and we could talk about that if you want to, but I won't do that right now. We can.
That is my next question. So.
Okay, all right, we'll get into it. But one nutrient that I hadn't talked about, and I think is totally underappreciated, and definitely underconsumed by 95+% of women, is choline. So choline is something that our body can synthesize somewhat, but we need to get it from outside sources as well. And some of the most concentrated dietary sources are animal-based, definitely egg yolk, liver, like organ meats, meat in general. So animal source foods. So vegetarians and vegans are at especially high risk for not getting enough choline, because some of the plant-based sources, they do exist, but they're not anywhere near the concentration that it takes a lot basically to get there, for what we need. And so choline is something that most people are not getting in nearly enough of, and it plays a really vital role in normal neural tube development, which one of the reasons, again, why preconception nutrition is so important is that the neural tube actually closes and is done forming at about week 5 of pregnancy. That's like 1 week after a missed period. You might not have even really registered that you're pregnant yet or tested. And so you've got to have those important nutrients for neural tube development and formation on board preconception. So that's vitamin B12, that's folate, that's choline, other nutrients to some extent, but choline's really important for that. So I worry about how deficient we are in general in it, or optimal we are in that. And the trend towards more plant-based diets, putting people more at risk. And so there's the minimum amount that you want daily during pregnancy is about 450 milligrams, 550 milligrams. It jumps up to that during breastfeeding. But newer research suggests that between diet and supplements, you really are wanting to shoot for more like 900 milligrams. So it's actually even higher than we thought. And why that's important is it's the neural tube, but it's brain development for baby. There's some good research that has tracked from pregnancy through age 7, I believe. And it really looked at cognitive development and IQ and that sort of thing. And choline intake had a big impact and was a differentiator in those variables. So it's an important nutrient that most people aren't getting enough of.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing all that. And I guess on the point of the folic acid versus folate versus methylfolate, can you talk a little bit about kind of the reasons why, there's a shift more towards using methylfolate or different variations?
Yeah. So this is a nutrient that has a lot of politics around it. And it's actually one that I've actually personally received death threats over. So, which is actually wild. I have a whole story about that, but I have a long history with folate versus folic acid. And actually for any practitioners listening, Lily Nichols and I, a colleague of ours, did a really intense 2-hour webinar on going through all of the intricacies and research and everything through the Women's Health Nutrition Academy. But largely speaking, so here's where we are with it, right? So how we came up with folic acid, completely man-made version of folate, is in the 90s. After years of processing grains, stripping out nutrients by removing the bran, removing some of the aspects of grains to refine them, we were losing key B vitamins like folate that were naturally present in grains. And so, as a public health effort, it was determined that, and it was legislated that companies, food producers had to, if they were using a refined grain of a refined product, they had to add back folic acid. They had to add back folate in the form of folic acid in order to address what was a growing number of neural tube defects that we were seeing as a result of this refined grain refining process. So basically, the food industry was told, you've got to add back what you've taken out. And because folate in the forms that we find in food, like methylfolate, folinic acid, which, by the way, methylfolate makes up over 80% of the folate that we find in food. So that's where it's naturally present. Folic acid is hundreds of times cheaper than those forms. So I think in order to balance what was realistic for the food industry to actually do and achieve with the cost barriers, right? Folic acid was created and it's been added to the supply. Now, it has had a positive effect at reducing neural tube defects, right? Like it has to some extent achieved that. And when you measure the effectiveness of folic acid, it's absorbed really well in the intestine. And so you see it in your bloodstream. The problem is doesn't mean that our body is utilizing it. Folic acid has to be converted to methylfolate in order for our bodies to use it. It has to. And so that's a process that some people are more efficient at than others. Now, I think personally, there's way too much emphasis on MTHFR. People almost starting to talk about like I am MTHFR, like I have it, like it's a diagnosis. It's not. Like it might make you a little less or a little more efficient, a little less efficient, at converting. But the real problem to me is no matter what your MTHFR status is, no one is really efficiently converting folic acid to methylfolate. There's always going to be some folic acid that's left unmetabolized. It's just, and it is circulating through your body. And we're finding now, I mean, well, it's not even recent. I mean, it's been in the literature. People are just aren't looking for the right thing, I don't think. Is unmetabolized folic acid can cause problems and harm in the body. So it can reduce natural killer cell activity. It can get in the way of metabolizing other nutrients properly. There's all kinds of nuance there. So my real recommendation and what I suggest is, looking for methylfolate or even folinic acid, because these are forms that our body can use just as they are. And so that's why we use that in FullWell prenatal, and why I generally don't recommend folic acid. Now, there's some really outspoken and very contentious debate online, and via various influencers on it, saying, folic acid is the only thing that's been tested to prevent neural tube defects, and it's the only safe thing, therefore, to use. I would just argue, to kind of wrap this up here, sorry, I could go on it. I would say that good logic and sense does not. Why wouldn't we use what we find in food and we know our body can use? Why wouldn't we use the end product that we have to convert to anyway? And also, the reason it hasn't been widely studied is there isn't funding for it. There isn't a desire for it. And there's active lobbying efforts against doing that because it'd be more expensive for the food industry,
Wow.
So there's a lot of politics, and debate on it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think even in undergrad, in becoming a dietitian, the folic acid side is highlighted. We don't ever hear about other forms of nutrients, but that makes a lot of sense. That why wouldn't you want to go with, if you have to dig into the nuance and understanding that what the end product is, where the goal is that we're trying to get to, really understand why you would want to use that. Yeah. Now, what about other forms of nutrients? I know if people were to look at your standard Centrum 1 a day, that kind of thing, prenatals compared to FullWell, there's very clear differences, the form of nutrients, but a lot of people aren't familiar with that there are different forms of nutrients. So we talked about folate, but maybe what are some others that people can kind of look for?
Yeah, I think another really good example that will kind of tell you about the quality of the product as well as probably who's behind formulating it would be to look at magnesium. And I think this is especially important if someone has IBD and they're taking a supplement. The cheapest, least expensive form of magnesium is magnesium oxide. It's also by far the least easy for our body to absorb. And so it can create quite a bit of distress, right? It pulls in a lot of water, as it has a laxative type of effect. So I use magnesium bisglycinate, which is a chelated mineral, and all the minerals in our formula are chelated, so they're combined with another ingredient to make a compound that our body is able to more easily and efficiently absorb and utilize. And usually there might be some other small benefit to the compound that it's into, like glycine has got other benefits, in the body as well. But I think that's a big difference I'd point to is the form of magnesium. You know, B12, you can see, again, like folic acid, cyanocobalamin is a form that our body will always have to convert down into methylcobalamin. And so that's another nutrient that is much easier for our body to utilize when it's broken down. Now, some nutrients are not difficult for our body to convert into their usable form. And I think sometimes we apply that methylfolate, folic acid logic to too many things, and it's not the same, but that's kind of getting into the weeds. So I would say those are some good examples. Yeah.
Yeah. And even when we're looking at B12, someone could come out in labs as it not being a problem, but there could still be a problem, right? In terms of like the utilization of it, which kind of what you're saying is, there's absorption, which we want to think about, like which nutrient absorbs well, but also the availability and how your body takes that and then uses it.
Yes. And that is so important because if you go in and just get a blood test, a serum test from your provider on folate or B12, the levels might look fine. They probably will. Your body does an okay job of kind of keeping some of those blood levels pretty consistent. It's really reflective of whatever you've just eaten, whatever you have consumed from a supplement form. And even if it's in a form like cyanocobalamin or folic acid, you're still going to see it in the bloodstream. But then the blood's being delivered throughout your body, right? To deliver fresh oxygenated blood and nutrients to where it needs to go. And that's where the utilization comes in. And in order for your body to utilize it, that that conversion has to happen. And so that's what's really hard to measure. What we ultimately have to measure in those cases are like, okay, what do your symptoms look like? Is there's some functional tests that do it a little better than others, like looking at like stores versus what's just in your bloodstream. But it's a little bit more difficult. And so when it comes to deciding what you actually need, I don't think you definitely with nutrients aside from like a vitamin D and a few different things, you really can't just go based on blood tests. That's not telling you what your body actually needs. I think it's a combination of what do we know gets the best outcomes from the research? Like at what level do we see the best outcomes and what we're trying to achieve in the research? And then where's the risk? Where's the risk of going too far, too much? And that's different depending on what nutrient you're talking about. When it comes to B vitamins, there's very little risk. It's water soluble. You'll just excrete what you don't use. The tie between B12 and autism has really been thoroughly debunked. So that's something I hear about a lot from FullWell customers is concern of having too high B12 and that risk. But that really, if we went point by point, we could look at it, but it's really not a true risk. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have also heard quite a bit of people who resist a little bit the using a multivitamin or prenatal because they're looking for kind of whole food forms. They want to do it the most natural way. But what's some of the in natural I use is maybe not the best way to actually describe it, but like maybe you can speak to what are the reasons why that's just not a good option in this case, why we need to be thinking about.
I
actually.
know it feels so counterintuitive. We get this question all the time too from the FullWell community, and also just like I did in practice. And I understand it as someone who would love for us to get everything we need from food and for us to only eat food and get our nutrients in the context of food. Like I want that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to supplement, right, and there's really good cases for it for most people, what you really want is the dose combined with the most bioavailable format possible. So we want you to get the most bang for your buck, right? Like to be able to utilize the nutrient best and get the amount that's actually needed to see an effect. If we were to try to do that without the use of, and there's such a negative connotation around synthetic, but if we were to try to do that with just whole food based, what you would essentially have is a concentration of whole foods. Now, that's going to wind up being buckets of powder that you're taking a day. I mean, it's going to be many, many, many capsules, and you also have less stability, I mean, there's as soon as you powder dry whole foods, they start to lose their potency as when they're exposed to light, air, heat, they're going to lose their potency. So just taking like a scoop of like a whole foods powder, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not as efficient and it's going to require a ton more, like an unreasonable amount more. And so when I look at formulas that are like, we have this compound from blueberry, it's like, this is pixie dusting, kind of what I was talking about before. This is like, we have such a tiny amount that we can say it's on the label, right? Or we could say there's blueberry, but if you looked at it, it's like half of a blueberry in every serving. It's just not, just eat your blueberries, you're going to enjoy that so much better, right? Like if you're going to take a supplement, make sure it's effective. And synthetic doesn't mean bad. It really doesn't. A lot of times, it's just the nutrient is completely isolated. It's created in a way that your body can use it. It mimics maybe a form that we do find most in nature, like methylfolate is technically synthetic, but it's the form of folate that we find in 80% of the food supply. So I think that it's nice but it's just marketing language to say whole food based, natural, and avoiding synthetic ingredients. I also see this idea of avoiding fillers and additives. Again, sounds really nice, and we do that as well, but there are certain things like a little bit of silica, which is totally fine, or like some other ingredients that really help to ensure that you're getting consistent. They're not unsafe, they're absolutely fine, right? Like I'm very judicious with that, but like they help make sure you're getting consistent doses per serving, that what's in your serving actually matches the label. I think that's just so important, because if a company isn't using that and they're saying we're just throwing nutrients in a capsule and we're not using anything like magnesium stearate or silica to help make sure that all these different size nutrients are coming together in a serving that matches the label, then I'd be really suspicious, that it even does. Yeah.
That's a really good point. That is a question that we've gotten a lot too, is like the concern for the fillers, but they play an important role, it sounds like. And then also they're in such small amounts too. It's like
super tiny amounts.
Yeah, when it sounds scary when you're looking at it, but when you actually look at the details, it's like it's pretty small.
Yeah, and I mean, magnesium stearate is just magnesium and stearic acid, which stearic acid is in coconut oil. It's in our food, throughout our food supply, right? It's in avocados, like, so it sounds scary, but it's not. Now, I think being a critical consumer is still super important. And, we do want to avoid like artificial flavors and dyes, to some extent. For some people that may be more important than others. But I think like we don't as a brand use any of those. Yeah.
And I guess too, like speaking of that, mindful and critical consumer, if you will, there's always questions that come up when it comes to supplements. One of them being too, when we look at the FullWell prenatal, there are nutrients that are on the higher percentage levels. Some people may be concerned about that. And I know you had mentioned in the podcast as well, you're looking at the research to support that. But is there anything else you could add to that piece, Ayla?
Yeah. And I really do feel for for consumers, because it's like the only thing that you have really to go on, unless you're working with a practitioner sorting through all of this, is like you're looking to be guided by that label, right? And right now we've got percent daily value, which is a reflection of the RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance. And the problem is some of those levels haven't been, well, one, they haven't been looked at in decades. Two, they might be extrapolated based on men, studies in men, also not good when it comes to pregnant women. Three, I think that they just don't take into account what is optimal and what is more based on more current evidence. It's more like what's going to keep the lights on, like what's going to keep us just barely thriving, not even like just alive, So and then, the other consideration is how well can your body absorb and utilize at any given time a nutrient? For example, B12, only a small percentage of vitamin B12 can be absorbed by your body at any given time. And that's just a limitation of how much intrinsic factor we have in enzymes and all of that. And there's very little risk to adding more to ensure you're maximizing what your body can absorb and letting your body kind of get rid of what it doesn't need. And that's the way we approach it I approached really the formulation of it was looking at, okay, what do we know about the safety of this nutrient? What is the upper limit? Because we sometimes have that data too on nutrients. What's the most that you can take without having risk of toxicity? And well, we're going to stay way below that, right? Below any risk of toxicity or negative effects. But we want to have enough to make sure that you have a really good chance of getting in enough of what you need. And then combine it with that third element of the RDAs, the DRIs, like what you're seeing percent daily value on a label is typically not taking into account what is optimal, what is most current. Yeah.
I love that. You explained that well. That's great to have that. I guess like to tag along with that, the serving size of your capsules, I think it's 8 capsules in a day.
Yep.
Which may be a lot for some people.
It is. And I know when I formulated, I was like, all right, we're going to just let me just put everything in as I know it would be optimal. What would I really want to get in there? And, what I discovered in the formulation process is that there are some nutrients that are really critical that often get left out that are very bulky and they take up the majority of the room. And so those nutrients for this stage of life are really calcium, magnesium, and choline. And so in order to get in at least enough to help complement what you would get in through your diet normally to meet your needs, you and baby's needs, that was really the minimum for those nutrients I felt good about putting in there. And so that got us to the 8. It's not the B vitamins that are driving it up. Those are tiny, tiny, tiny. It's really those 3 nutrients. So, ultimately I felt like having everything in one bottle in one serving really helps simplify it so that you're not combining lots of products. And it also, I wanted to make sure people were getting in what they needed for all of those things versus having to make another choice on another product and missing out on something that they could need. So that's really how that came to be. So it definitely is jarring. And I think the number one reason why people might not choose our prenatal, but I would really be caution folks against look at what's missing. It's one of those 3 nutrients. If you've got anything less than a 6 or 8 a day, it doesn't have one or enough of any of those in it. And then also you can open up the capsules or blend the entire capsule like into a smoothie. Like that's an option. You can take it 4 with breakfast, 4 with lunch. You can break it up. You can just open up the capsule if you want to. So that helps. But the reason we have it in a capsule and not like a scoopable format is it provides, again, consistent doses, because I really worry about powdered situation where everything's different weights and sizes and everything. And like you're getting folate for one part of your pregnancy, but you're not for the next, so it's about consistency of the dose to put it in a capsule format. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you wouldn't want inconsistency there. Mm-hmm. So I have a question too around when we think about culturally the fertility journey, there's this pressure that happens with women 30 to 35 of like, okay, if I haven't had a kid by now, my odds are just like gone. Do you feel like if we were to put more emphasis on, you know, getting the right nutrients and focus in on the nutrition part, that actually takes some of the pressure off or extends the possibilities of what we have established as like fertility zone?
Yeah, I really truly believe this. And I've talked about it a lot and shared kind of the thought process on it in my own work. And because it's really, aging is more the cumulative effect of oxidative stress and nutrient deficiencies like over time. So if we can address that with maybe some more antioxidants, some more nutrients, giving the body more of what it needs, I think, you know, it really does support egg quality, hormonal balance. You know, it's really, it comes down to supporting good hormonal balance so that there could be proper development of the egg and the follicle, ovulation, and then sustaining a pregnancy. And it's also that the quality of giving the egg itself, you know, the nutrient resources it needs to develop properly. So I think if we can monitor and really manage those two things, then age isn't as important. You know, it's just that you tend to see those, both of those things decline naturally over time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Now, if you could, so we talked about so many things today, so many really good, powerful messages. If you could kind of condense down to like, for those people who are considering pregnancy, considering that journey, wanting to start down that path, like what are your top suggestions for where they should
Mm-hmm.
start?
Yeah. So if you think that conception is even a possibility, like you're not sure, but you think it's something that you that could be in your future, or maybe you have a timeline and you know when you want to start trying, my my biggest advice is for you and your partner, if you have a male partner, would be to start now. There's never too soon to start making sure that you're repleting nutrients, giving your body lots of antioxidants, and looking for any like big bang for your buck type of stressors in your environment. And so while we can control all of the different pollutants and plastics and various things in our life, I think you can look at the things that you use the most or you do the most daily and see if there's like one or two swaps that you can make to reduce the burden on your body. So I would say one big one would be like if you are cooking every day, you love to cook and you're using Teflon pans, you know, that have got, are known to have PFAS, you know, detrimental chemicals like in the coating, you know, try to switch out the pan that you use the most with something non-toxic, like a stainless steel or a ceramic or cast iron. I think for IBD, cast iron, not sure you both your opinion, but that might be a good one to like infuse a little more iron and that sort of thing. So I would say looking for not getting overwhelmed with all of the things that need to be done. No one is perfect and you do not need to be perfect. But what you can do and what is in your control, and I think feels really empowering, is learn more about gaps in your diet, infuse more nutrition, a focus on antioxidants, and pick like one or two things that are environmental contaminant kind of stressors on the body in your life, like a body lotion that you slather yourself in all day. Like, does that, you know, or like the pan that you use all the time, like pick those things and swap them out. And just that, can make that is proactive. And just know that even if you don't feel it or see it, you know, or suspect you'd even have fertility issues, like that is making a difference on the health of your pregnancy and baby's long-term health. So yeah.
Those are some really good tips. So do you have any like favorite antioxidants or favorite
Yeah.
go-to?
Yeah. Well, definitely the ones that have been most researched, right, will be, you know, CoQ10, coenzyme Q10. I would say, you know, alpha lipoic acid. Ashwagandha, believe it or not, has some antioxidant like activity. And I think a lot of it is because it's an herb that helps with our stress response and we're kind of managing that. I was NAC, N-acetylcysteine. That's a really good one, a really important one because that helps our detoxification system. And then I just think like lots of colorful fruits and vegetables, you know, lots of potent berries and citrus. I always tell people like, if you have citrus, don't throw away the peel, zest up a little bit of it and put it like in a dressing or on top of a salad or like at the end of a dish, because that's going to give you lots of bioflavonoids, you know, little things like that.
I haven't thought about and that actually tastes really good too, like to do lemon zest or
Mm-hmm.
like in a smoothie or something. So that's a great idea. Do you have any words of encouragement for people that are kind of in the space of struggling with fertility and struggling to get the support they need?
Yeah, I think it can feel just really isolating. And again, as we know, culturally the burden is on women, right? And it feels like a ton of pressure, and can be a long journey. I think, that one thing that I've tried to do, and is a big project that we worked on last year, was create a practitioner directory on FullWell's site so that you can half of it. I mean, sometimes it's just overwhelming trying to find someone who even speaks the language and understands this world and this. And so everybody on there are fertility, perinatal, reproductive health specialists, and that could be a place to go if you need a complement to we can't be specialists in everything. Like for IBD, you go to you guys, right? But then maybe there's a collaborative practitioner that's helping navigate the fertility aspect of it too, and that could be a really nice thing. Sometimes they're more like complementary type of services around like acupuncture and different type chiropractic care and different things that can really help. So I've also spent a lot of time over the years working on our like knowledge well, our educational resources that I think are a really great place to start when you're like looking at how do I think about this? What labs do I ask for? So I heard someone say like evaluate your thyroid, but what does that mean? Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of resources on that. I have always tried to put through the lens of like, what would I tell a practice client sitting in front of me, and try to make it as easy so that you don't feel like you need a master's in nutrition, but you know what you need to do to evaluate your own health. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for those resources. I go on there all the time, and I've done some of your educational webinars, and it's definitely for people that want to deep dive or want to know the next step or want to go deeper than just the general guidance that we all get on when you search online. So it's a really great resource. So thank you for putting that together, and definitely that's something that you could check out if you're hoping to get pregnant, or if you're a practitioner. It's just a really great resource.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So where can people find you and get connected?
Yeah. So FullWell is at FullWell Fertility on Instagram, and then FullWellFertility.com. If someone's looking to make a purchase, I know FullWell 20 will get you 20% off on your first purchase. I'm on LinkedIn mostly. I post, if you like to look at stories about herbs and like what I'm doing in my garden, and really, really random things. And you can follow me, Ayla Barmmer _RD, but it's not going to be your hard hitting information in that account. Yeah. And I think those are the places. I think if there's any practitioners though, or really savvy consumers that want to like go really deep, the Women's Health Nutrition Academy has got continuing education around women's health topics like fertility.
Yeah. And anything new that you're working on right now that you're excited about? I know I saw you just put together like a probiotic, which was super exciting to me.
Yes. Yeah. And I know we didn't talk about that. Maybe another episode we could, because I'm definitely curious about both of your takes on it. But a lot of thought and research went into that. I was very hesitant for a bunch of reasons to do a probiotic. But I'm really happy with how we did this one. So we recently, just in the past couple of weeks, launched a collagen peptides that is the most thoroughly tested and also pregnancy and breastfeeding safe collagen peptides on the market. Very proud of that one. And a probiotic that addresses vaginal microbiome, digestive health, and also stress resilience. So there's a really cool strain in there that helps support stress management. And so those three together, I felt were a great combination for everyday use for women. And then we've got a really cool something coming in December that if you get on our newsletter, I'd love to be able to share it now. I can't quite yet. I was told not to. But in December, very excited about something that's going to be very helpful for those wanting to get insight into their fertility now. And then next year, a couple of additional products too. So I'm really trying to make a complete offering. We're never going to have to support women's reproductive health and men's reproductive health. We're never going to be the brand that has 20 different products a quarter and a million different things. We're really focused on reproductive health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're excited to hear about that. We'll have to have you on to talk about the probiotic and your surprises for the new year.
Yeah, like what a great teaser.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for being here, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks.